Hello, Alex the Border Collie here. Jesus Christ, I haven't put out videos in a while. I had a baby, last year, in December. My son is right here next to me while I'm recording, smiling at me. You gonna say hello, Rick? You gonna cough at me? Hi, bud. He says hello. So yeah, the December 13th last year, I had my son. Things were kind of hectic for a while. There were some complications when he was born, and we spent a week in the hospital together. And then after that, he was just really colicky for a few months. Just all the time. He's pretty chill now, though. Though he's wanting my attention. I'll hold you while we record. 'Cause why not? In any case, so I keep meaning to try and start getting in the habit of making videos where I talk about topics that interest me. Don't grab my backup drive. Stop that. Topics that interest me, because I like talking about stuff. But one of the things that keeps, slowing me down in the process of doing this is a painful insecurity regarding the audio quality of my microphones, and I just kinda hate the sound of my own voice, to be perfectly honest. But I'm going to try and just suck it up and deal with the sound quality that I have, because I don't know how else to get anything better than this right now. And just make videos anyway. So today I'm gonna talk about a topic that one of my patrons has wanted me to make a video discussing, and I tried to make a video multiple times on this topic. I tried various different scripts and different approaches, and just couldn't figure out how to tackle it the way that I wanted to. And the topic was specifically Shadow the Hedgehog, the video game, not the character. Although I guess there will be some discussion of the character for obvious reasons, but the game specifically. And the thing is, what he wanted me to do, since both of us personally are actually rather fond of this game, and I'll get more into a large part of why I enjoy it later, but he wanted me to sort of get into sort of defending some of the game's better qualities against what we both see as kind of unfair criticism, but I feel like just defending Shadow the Hedgehog doesn't actually get at the real heart of the problem at hand. I'm going to use Shadow the Hedgehog as sort of an example of a particular idea. Something that I think I see happening a lot in internet culture that kind of bothers me, and I guess to some extent in media at large. And that is the sort of demonization, I guess, of edge. This idea that if something's edgy, that automatically means that it's bad. It's bad, it's stupid, it deserves to be mocked and ridiculed, and you're dumb for liking it. And I see this attitude a lot on the internet, and I think it's absolutely fucking retarded. Frankly, quite frankly, because here's the thing. People are alright with, if you like a comedy that's silly and stupid, people are usually fine with that. There are people who enjoy stuff that is so bad it's good, like The Room, and yet somebody who unironically enjoys something like, say, Shadow the Hedgehog is seen as some cringy edgelord to be made fun of. Rick, honey. I'll hold you again, but you have to stop messing with the stuff on my desk. Stop it. Stop messing with my desk. So, oh god, train of thought. So, anyhow, I think Shadow the Hedgehog works as a good example of this phenomenon that I'm talking about. Because I'll frequently, when people talk about, the worst of the worst Sonic games, you'll hear, stuff like Rise of Lyric or 06 get tossed out, and I think that those absolutely deserve the shit that they get. Rise of Lyric is just an awful shovelware game, and 06 is a just broken, unfinished mess. Well, I mean, I guess they're both broken, unfinished messes. I think if I had my choice, I'd prefer '06 to Rise of Lyric, but it's a pick-your-poison situation. But Shadow the Hedgehog is often tossed in with these games, I find, in a lot of conversations, and I don't think that that's anywhere near equivalent. Like, yeah, it's not the best game in the series, but I think to toss it in with games like Rise of Lyric or '06, which are just completely unplayable, broken messes of games, Shadow the Hedgehog just doesn't compare. I think the main reason why so many people treat it like it's one of the worst games in the series is just because it's edgy. And that's kind of sad to me, because edgy can be fun. Edge deserves to be respected as a form of enjoyable content, just like something that's cutesy or comedic or absurd or whatever. You can like edgy things, and I think that should be okay. I don't think it's fair to shit on people for liking something edgy. And if you don't mind me getting a little deep here on this topic, but I think there's a particular argument to be made as to edgy being kind of necessary. I personally feel like we need stuff like Shadow the Hedgehog. Not specifically this one particular game, but things like this. Things that are edgy and dark and brooding, but still kind of childish in their nature. And this is the territory where this stuff gets made fun of. If you make something dark and brooding that's aimed at adults, people usually don't care as much if it's like super serious and adult. It's when you hit this middle ground where it's dark and brooding, but it's still kind of childish and immature in its nature that it gets made fun of. And the thing is, this media has a place, and I don't think the people who like this sort of media should be made fun of for enjoying it, especially considering that the majority of people who are really going to enjoy something like this are gonna be, like, preteen children, mostly. Because you're at that age where you're starting to get somewhat more aware of the adult world, and many kids develop this curiosity surrounding adult topics, from violence to sex. They're very curious about these topics, but they also don't have enough life experience, or just, like, aren't well educated enough on these topics to really understand them fully. And so, like, a lot of kids this age will explore these ideas when they play. Like, if you ever read fan fiction from kids this age, it tends to also be very similar and explore a lot of these similar, like, adult ideas, but through a very kind of childish and simple lens. Because they are really fascinated with these adult concepts, but they have no basis for understanding them yet. They're trying to understand them. They're trying to wrap their head around them. And yeah, some of this stuff can seem kind of overbearing to an adult. To an adult, it can seem kind of absurd and silly, because it doesn't really match up with the real world. But I think that's fine, and I don't think that automatically makes it bad. I think that having this kind of edgy, childish media is important because it can serve as this middle ground between the cutesy, bubbly, kid-friendly stuff that most children grow up with and, like, harsh adult realities. I think it would be a lot to just throw a child straight into the deep end, into some piece of media that explores, like, really, like, harsh, mature themes, complicated, mature themes. Can be kind of a lot if they've never been exposed to that kind of media before. But I think something like Shadow the Hedgehog, something that is still kind of childish, can allow kids to start dipping their toes into the waters of, like, more dark or violent concepts without necessarily overwhelming them with stuff that's just a bit too much for them to handle, if that makes any sense. Media allows us to experience things in a safer way. You know, stories allow us to experience all kinds of things with sort of training wheels on, because none of it's real, you know? And that kind of helps us to wrap our heads around certain experiences or ideas without necessarily being overwhelmed or traumatized by them. And I think that this kind of transitional media like Shadow the Hedgehog, these kinds of, like, childish, edgy stuff, serves a function in children's development. Because the thing is, if adults don't make this stuff, kids will make it for themselves, for one. Children are still going to write fanfictions that are going to be like this. Children are still going to create their own stories that are going to be like this. If adults aren't making more mature material for them, kids are going to make it themselves. And I think that as, like, an adult writer myself, I feel like I almost have kind of a responsibility to create media that can function as a transition point, where the characters are still cartoony and colorful, the world is still fantastical, so it's going to catch a child's attention, and it's going to hold their attention because it's going to have all those superficial elements that tend to attract kids to a piece of media, but that simultaneously is willing to talk about adult subjects that these kids are likely going to be curious about, but not going to have much of a frame of reference to understand in any meaningful way. Because as an adult, I can write that material in such a way that it is designed to help kids better understand this stuff, and provide them with a better frame of reference. Now, as far as Shadow is concerned, in terms of themes or ideas that it explores, the two main ones is just that it's a bit more violent than a typical Sonic game, but it still is pretty subdued in that department. Like, for example, you can't kill the human gun soldiers. They just fall over on the ground and then beg you not to hurt them, and then that's all you can do to them. But mostly the main theme of the game is sort of this idea of, like, morality. You get to be good, bad, or evil, and it's handled very simplistically. And personally, I think it could be handled better, but at the very least, I appreciate what it's attempting to do. And if nothing else, I do think Shadow the Hedgehog is actually a really fun game. In fact, I'm going to admit something cringy. It's one of my favorite Sonic games. Like, it's childish, and it's silly, but, like, so is every Sonic game. Why is this particular brand of silly childishness deserving of ridicule, but, you know, other stuff isn't? Other stuff that's more cutesy gets a pass. My Little Pony gets praised for being, like, this great show by people, but then Shadow the Hedgehog gets maligned for being too edgy. And I wouldn't say that either one of them is really more mature than the other. They're both pretty childish and pretty silly, and they're both enjoyable, just in different ways and for different reasons. And I think that's okay. I don't think there's anything wrong about indulging in over-the-top edgy schlock from time to time. And I think that when we immediately mock and criticize any piece of media or fanfiction or whatever that indulges in edgy schlock in this manner, we discourage children from exploring these themes. And I think that allowing them the freedom to explore these ideas is important. I think it's an important part of their development and the process through which they learn to understand the world. I don't think it's fair to shit on a particular style of story because of where it lands in that media spectrum. This kind of stuff appeals to a very particular demographic of kids. It tends to appeal to kids that are in that middling point where they're not quite yet able to handle, like, really adult mature material, either because they don't have the attention span yet or the interest to indulge in it, or it's just a bit too dark, too sexual, too whatever, and they're not comfortable with that yet. But something like Shadow, which is in this little middle ground, allows them to feel more grown up. It allows them to explore more adult ideas without the discomfort of being thrust into something that is far more mature than they're really ready for just yet. And I think most of the people in my audience listening to me talk about this, who are either like adults or older teenagers or whatever, can probably remember their edgy phase when they were growing up. Almost every single person I know has been through some variation of the edgy phase. That phase where you're fascinated by sex and or violence or whatever have you, by adult things, but you don't understand them fully yet. And a lot of people look back on this phase and they cringe and they're embarrassed because there's something kind of awkward about these juvenile attempts to wrap your head around adult topics that you don't really understand. And sometimes these attempts to understand these topics can be colossal failures. Sometimes it can be very obvious that a kid doesn't really understand this thing. They just know that it's a grown-up thing. Like, if you've ever listened to a kid who's just starting to learn how to swear, and they just swear constantly because they think it makes them sound grown up, but they don't really know how to use swear words, like, appropriately in conversation yet. That kind of thing. But I don't think that that's a phase of our lives that we need to be embarrassed by, personally. I don't think that we should really feel the need to shame people who are going through that phase, and I don't think there's any real reason to be embarrassed by it either, any more than a person would be embarrassed by the fact that they used to wear diapers when they were a baby. Like, it is what it is. We all go through a point in our life where we don't understand certain things, and we have to go through the process of learning and understanding them. And sometimes that process is, a little awkward, because we don't necessarily get everything right on the first try. It's okay. And I think it's okay to have media that appeals to that childlike desire to want to understand adult subjects and to want to engage in them, while still not, expecting kids to either be tossed into situations that they are woefully unprepared to deal with, stories that would make them very uncomfortable, but also, doesn't expect them to understand these subjects more than would be reasonable for someone their age. I don't think Shadow the Hedgehog deserves to be treated like one of the worst games in the franchise just because it's edgy. Yes, it's edgy, but you know what? It's also pretty fun. And it's pretty damn absurd and silly at points, and sometimes even kinda tongue-in-cheek about itself. But all people ever remember is that it's dark and edgy, and that's all anyone ever takes away from it. I think there's more to the game, experientially, than just edge, although that is a lot of its appeal, is sort of this rule of cool. There's a level where you get to ride a motorcycle, and it makes no goddamn sense, because why would Shadow need a motorcycle? But you know what, I don't care, because motorcycles are cool. So who gives a shit? I think it's okay. I think it's okay to have stuff like this. So I guess that's my whole point. I'm getting close to 20 minutes now, so I'm just sort of wrapping up this thought process. But yeah, I would advocate in favor of more edgy content. I think that if you're an adult making stories, don't be afraid to write stuff that tackles sex, romance, violence, politics, whatever, but through a more childlike lens. Stuff that can serve as sort of a teaching tool, as like a training wheels for younger audiences to start understanding these subjects. I think that's perfectly okay. And if you yourself are, 12, 13, whatever, going through your little kind of edgy phase where you're really fascinated by this stuff, but you're still kind of uncomfortable by media that has, porn still makes you uncomfortable, media that's, super gory or graphic still makes you kind of uncomfortable, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with you for being interested in dark, edgy stuff and for indulging in that kind of media. It's normal. It's even kind of healthy, I would argue. It's just part of growing up. So if you're sitting there writing your edge fic, where, everybody's dying and being tortured and constantly crying, that's fine. You do you. Write your stories. Write whatever you want. Explore these ideas to your heart's content, and if someone shits on you for being an edgelord, fuck 'em. Because their opinions don't matter. These are your stories. This is the stuff going on in your head. You tackle these topics in whatever way you feel like you need to really wrap your head around them. Explore them to your heart's content, and don't let other people make you feel like shit because you don't understand them as well as an adult would. So, that's all I had to say. Yeah, I'm pretty much done. You guys have my full permission to harass me in the comments section to keep making more videos where I talk about stuff. And if you don't mind Rick just interrupting the videos from time to time, I am fine with allowing him to participate in future recordings. Maybe the sloppiness of these recordings will make me feel less insecure and embarrassed to upload my thoughts to the internet. So, that's all for now. I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.